What if nothing was ever meant to happen? Not the universe, not the planet, not the moment you were born, not the person you became, not the choices that shaped your life. Tonight, I am here with Rowan Hartsteele.
Good evening, Clara.
The question at the center of this episode is one that philosophy and science have been circling for centuries. Whether the universe operates according to any intention at all, or whether everything we experience, including the sense that things happen for a reason, is something we impose rather than discover. Tonight, we turn to the philosophical hypothesis of a random universe, and to the thinkers who looked at that hypothesis without flinching. We ask what it means to be a meaning-seeking creature in a universe that may be completely indifferent to your search.
The idea of a random universe is not a counsel of despair, and it is not a scientific claim that everything is equally likely. It is a philosophical position, one that holds that the events of the universe, from the formation of matter to the emergence of life, to the specific circumstances of any individual human existence, occur through the operation of physical laws and probability, not through intention, design, or purpose.
We are speaking about the philosophical implications of a universe without plan or purpose.
A universe that does not care what happens in it, not because it is hostile, but because caring is a property of minds, and the universe is not a mind. Its operations are neither benevolent nor cruel.
Then let us begin with what we actually know about how the universe came to exist, and what that tells us.
The current scientific understanding of the origin of the universe describes an event, approximately 13.8 billion years ago, in which an extraordinarily dense and hot state expanded rapidly, releasing the energy and matter that would eventually form everything that exists. This event is commonly called the Big Bang, though the name is somewhat misleading. It was not an explosion in the conventional sense, and it did not occur in space. It was the beginning of space itself. What is philosophically significant about this account is what it does not include. It does not include a reason. There is no framework within which physics can address the question of why the initial conditions were as they were, or why there is something rather than nothing. These questions fall outside the domain of physical explanation, and they have not been answered.
So science can describe what happened in considerable detail, but the question of why it happened at all remains open.
Yes. And for many physicists and philosophers, the honest response to that open question is not to fill it with purpose, but to acknowledge that the universe may simply not have a why. The initial conditions existed. The physical laws operated. Matter formed, cooled, clumped under gravity, ignited into stars, exploded and scattered heavier elements, which formed new stars and planets. On at least one of those planets, the chemical conditions were such that molecules capable of self-replication emerged. Those molecules became the basis of biological life. Over billions of years, through a process of variation and selection that has no foresight and no goal, organisms of increasing complexity appeared. Eventually, among those organisms were beings capable of asking why any of this happened.
Though the capacity to ask the question is itself one of the random outcomes of the process.
Yes, and that observation has a particular kind of weight. The mind asking the question is not standing outside the process looking in. It is a product of the process, shaped entirely by the same physical laws and probabilistic events that produced everything else. There is no privileged vantage point from which a human being can survey the universe and determine that it was organized for their benefit.
And yet the experience of being human is saturated with the sense that things happen for reasons.
Yes. This is perhaps the central fact about human cognition in relation to the universe. We are pattern recognition machines. The capacity to identify regularities, to connect cause and effect, to project forward and backward in time, to construct narratives that organize experience into sequences with beginnings, middles, and ends. These are, and, not optional features of human consciousness. They are how we think. This capacity was enormously useful in evolutionary terms. A mind that can identify patterns in the environment, predict the behavior of predators and prey, recognize reliable sources of food and water, and model the intentions of other minds has a significant survival. The cost of this capacity is that it operates even when there is no pattern to find.
So we see meaning even where none exists, because the machinery that finds meaning cannot easily be switched off.
Exactly. Psychologists have documented this tendency extensively. People find faces in clouds, intention in coincidence, narrative in sequences of random events. When a positive outcome follows a decision, we attribute the outcome to the quality of the decision. even when the causal connection is weak. When a negative outcome follows an action, we search for the lesson it was meant to teach, as if the universe were communicating. This tendency has a name in cognitive science: apophenia, the tendency to perceive connections and meaning between unrelated things. It is not a failure of intelligence. It is a feature of human perception that served important functions, and that now operates continuously, in a world that does not necessarily warrant it.
So the conflict is not between knowing and feeling. It is built into the structure of how we experience the world.
Yes, and this is where the philosophical tension becomes personal rather than abstract. Most people do not move through their lives thinking about the Big Bang. They think about their own lives, why they succeeded or failed at something, why they met the people they met, why certain opportunities arrived and others did not. And in all of these domains, the question of randomness versus intention has direct and often uncomfortable implications. Consider success. The dominant narrative in many cultures holds that success is the result of effort, talent, and character. Work hard, develop your abilities, make good choices, and you will achieve what your efforts deserve. This narrative is motivating, and it is not entirely false. Effort and ability do matter, but they are far from the complete story.
So luck plays a larger role than most people are comfortable acknowledging.
Considerably larger. The family you were born into, the country and era of your birth, the specific people you encountered at critical moments, the timing of opportunities relative to your level of preparation, the health of the economy and sin, the year you entered the workforce. None of these are chosen. All of them shape outcomes at least as much as personal qualities do. This is not an argument against effort. It is an argument for honesty about the conditions under which effort operates. Two people of identical talent and identical effort, born into different circumstances, will on average produce very different outcomes. The difference is not character.
And the same logic applies to failure.
Yes, the tendency to attribute failure entirely to personal shortcomings is as distorting as the tendency to attribute success entirely to personal merit. Both operate by replacing the actual complexity of probabilistic causation with a clean narrative, in which the individual is the decisive variable. That narrative is comforting in success and devastating in failure, and in both cases it is incomplete. Relationships follow the same pattern. People who enter your life do so through a combination of your choices, your circumstances, and a vast web of contingencies that you did not control. The person you fell in love with was reachable because of where you happened to be, at a time when you both happened to be available, in a configuration of social networks that neither of you designed.
So the most significant events in a life are often those over which the person had the least direct control.
Yes, and acknowledging this produces a kind of vertigo. If the major coordinates of your life, where you were born, who you met, which doors opened and which remained closed, were largely a function of probability rather than destiny, then the story you tell about your life, as a sequence of meaningful choices leading to an earned outcome, may be, at least in part, a retrospective construction. This is the point at which philosophy enters with particular force, and the philosopher who addressed this tension most directly and most memorably in the 20th century was Albert Camus.
So Camus is the turning point in this narrative.
Yes. Camus was an Algerian-born French writer and philosopher who came of age during the Second World War, and whose thought was shaped by direct experience of violence, occupation, and historical catastrophe. He was not a systematic philosopher in the academic sense. He was a writer who thought philosophically, and his central concern was what he called the absurd. The absurd for Camus is not a property of the universe alone, and not a property of the human mind alone. It is what arises in the confrontation between them. The human mind demands meaning, coherence, purpose, and explanation. The universe provides none of these. It is silent. It does not respond to the demand. The gap between what we need and what the world offers is the absurd.
So the absurd is not in the world, and not in us. It is between us and the world.
Exactly. And Camus argues that there are three possible responses to this recognition. The first is physical self-destruction, ending one's life because the absurdity is unbearable. The second is philosophical self-destruction, what he calls philosophical suicide, which means adopting a belief system, religious or secular, that resolves the tension by projecting meaning onto the universe. The third is revolt.
So revolt is the response Camus recommends.
Yes. Revolt means continuing to live fully and consciously, while holding the absurd clearly in view, without resolving it, without pretending it away, without collapsing under it. It means refusing both false comfort and despair. It means engaging with existence on its own terms, which is to say, on terms that offer no guarantee of meaning, no cosmic endorsement, no final justification. Camus illustrates this with the figure of Sisyphus, the mythological king condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to have it roll back down each time he nears the top. The task has no purpose, produces no lasting result, and will never end. And yet Camus makes a claim that initially seems impossible. One must imagine Sisyphus happy.
That claim stops the reader completely. How can happiness follow from a perfectly futile existence?
The answer Camus gives is that Sisyphus owns his task. The boulder is his. The hill is his. The repetition, however absurd, is the content of his existence, and he does not require it to be otherwise in order to engage with it fully. His happiness is not the happiness of achieved purpose. It is a happiness of complete presence, of a consciousness that does not diminish itself by comparing its situation to an ideal it was never promised. This is a demanding and in some ways paradoxical idea. It requires holding two things simultaneously: the clear-eyed recognition that the universe offers no meaning, and the full engagement with life as if the specific content of one's existence matters enormously, not because it was assigned by some external authority, but because it is what is actually here.
So the absence of cosmic meaning does not produce emptiness. It produces a different kind of fullness.
Yes. And this is where the hypothesis of the random universe shifts from unsettling to, potentially, liberating. If the universe did not plan for you, then the universe did not plan against you either. The absence of destiny is symmetrical. It is not that a plan exists and you were left out of it. There is no plan. Which means there is no hierarchy of lives that were meant to be significant and lives that were not. Every configuration of existence is, from the perspective of the universe, equally arbitrary. The particular shape of your life, the specific people, places, struggles, and pleasures that constitute it, has no cosmic rank. It simply is. And the question of whether it is meaningful is entirely yours to answer.
So meaning becomes a human responsibility rather than a discovery.
Exactly. This is the central conclusion that both Camus and the broader existentialist tradition arrive at from different directions. If nothing has meaning by default, then meaning becomes something that conscious beings create through their choices, their attention, their commitments, and their willingness to act as if certain things matter, even unseen. The absence of external validation. This is not the same as saying that meaning is merely subjective and therefore arbitrary. Camus is not a nihilist. He does not say that because the universe is indifferent, nothing matters. He says that because the universe is indifferent, the question of what matters falls entirely to us, and that is a serious question, not a trivial one.
So the difference between absurdism and nihilism is precisely this. Nihilism concludes that nothing matters, while absurdism insists that the absence of given meaning makes the question of what matters more urgent, not less.
Yes. That distinction is critical. Nihilism is in some sense a reaction to the loss of a framework that was expected to provide meaning. If God is gone, or if the universe is indifferent, absurdism refuses that conclusion. It does not need the framework to have been there in the first place. It begins from the situation as it actually is, and asks what a human being does from here.
Before we close tonight, let us take a brief pause and welcome Margaret Evernight. Margaret, for those who want to go deeper into the ideas we have explored tonight, and particularly into Camus's response to the absurd, where would you invite them to continue?
Thank you, Clara. In this case, the most direct path is also the most important one. I would suggest beginning with the myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus.
So this is the text where Camus develops the concept of the absurd and the figure of Sisyphus directly.
It is. The myth of Sisyphus is Camus's extended philosophical essay on the absurd, arguing that humans seek meaning in a universe that offers none, and that the true challenge is not to resolve this tension, but to live fully, despite it. It is the foundational text of absurdist philosophy and one of the most honest pieces of philosophical writing of the 20th century.
And is this a text that a reader without a background in philosophy can follow?
It is more accessible than most philosophical works of comparable depth. Camus writes as a literary figure as much as a philosopher, and the essay moves between argument and image in a way that is engaging rather than purely technical. The central ideas are stated with great clarity, and the final image of Sisyphus descending the hill to retrieve his boulder stays with the reader in the way that only a few philosophical images do.
So reading it gives you not only the argument, but a way of seeing that changes how the ordinary details of a life appear.
Yes, and after reading it, the question of whether life requires a cosmic guarantee in order to be worth living feels considerably less urgent than it did before.
Thank you, Margaret. That is a thoughtful place to pause tonight.
Thank you, Clara. It was a pleasure.
The legacy of the philosophical engagement with randomness and the absurd is both broader and more practically relevant than it might initially appear. It extends beyond academic philosophy into how individuals and societies understand responsibility, fairness, and the relationship between effort and outcomes. If randomness plays a larger role in human outcomes than dominant cultural narratives acknowledge, then the moral weight attached to success and failure needs to be reconsidered. A culture that attributes success entirely to merit and failure entirely to personal shortcoming will systematically misread the actual distribution of advantage and disadvantage in its population.
So the philosophical question about randomness has direct consequences for how we judge ourselves and each other.
Yes, the person who succeeds in circumstances of significant advantage and attributes that success entirely to their own qualities is committing a form of intellectual dishonesty, and the person who fails despite genuine effort and attributes that failure entirely to their own inadequacy is doing themselves a corresponding injustice. Taking randomness seriously does not mean abandoning agency. It means calibrating the claims we make about agency more accurately. It means holding the two things together. I make choices that matter, and those choices operate within a field of contingencies that also matter, and that I did not choose.
So intellectual honesty about randomness leads not to passivity, but to a different, more grounded kind of engagement.
Yes, and this connects back to the psychological dimension of the question. One of the most consistent findings in the psychology of well-being is that people who have a flexible relationship with meaning, who can find significance in their current situation without requiring that situation to be permanent or cosmically endorsed, tend to navigate difficulty more effectively than those who depend on a fixed narrative of how their lives were supposed to go. The person who believed that a particular outcome was fated or deserved will experience its absence as a profound violation. The person who understood from the beginning that the future was genuinely open, that outcomes are produced by effort plus circumstance plus probability, will experience the same absence differently, as a situation to respond to rather than a verdict on their worth.
So releasing the need for cosmic endorsement turns out to be practically useful, not only philosophically honest.
Yes, Camus made this point in a different register, but the structure of the argument is the same. The person who can engage fully with their situation without requiring it to have been destined is more present, more responsive, and ultimately more capable of acting with genuine purpose than the person who is waiting for external validation that the universe is not in a position to provide. There is also a specific implication for how we think about the future. A belief in destiny, however comforting, tends to flatten the genuine openness of what has not yet happened. If things were meant to be a certain way, then the effort to make them otherwise is either unnecessary or futile. The hypothesis of the random universe, taken seriously, does the opposite. It insists that the future is genuinely undetermined, that choices made now will shape outcomes that are not yet fixed.
So randomness, paradoxically, is what makes effort meaningful. If the outcome were already decided, choosing would be theater.
That is precisely the inversion that this philosophy produces. In a universe where everything is planned, your choices are ultimately performances of a script you did not write. In a universe where nothing is planned, your choices are genuinely consequential. The indifference of the universe to your outcomes is also its refusal to predetermine them. This is what Camus means when he frames the recognition of the absurd, not as a conclusion, but as a beginning. The absence of a given meaning is not the end of the inquiry. It is the point at which the inquiry becomes genuinely yours. No authority has told you what matters. The universe has not answered your question about purpose. You are therefore faced unavoidably with the task of deciding for yourself.
So the silence of the universe is the condition that makes human meaning-making both necessary and possible.
Yes, if the universe had answered the question of meaning, our task would be to discover the answer and conform to it. Because it has not answered, the task is to create an answer and own it. That creation is not arbitrary. It is shaped by what we actually care about, what we actually experience, who is actually in our lives, and what we are actually capable of. The absence of destiny is not a limitation, it is freedom. Not because anyone assigned it, because you decided.
Thank you for staying with us tonight. And thank you, Rowan, for guiding us through the silence of a universe without plan, and through the philosophy that found in that silence not an ending but an opening.
Nothing was planned, which means everything that matters was chosen, and the choosing, however quietly it happens, is the only act of meaning available to us, which turns out to be more than enough.
If this conversation stayed with you, you are welcome to like, comment, and subscribe. You will find other episodes here where history, ideas, and power are approached slowly. Until next time, stay with us.